Hello class, I'm going to show you one more trick today for skies, and I'm going to show you how to use the clipping mask tool, which is a very powerful but somewhat complicated tool. One of the reasons why I'm going to do a second sky, it's just going to be a new sky. The reality is, if you look at examples, you see there's, in skies in particular, I find architects have really experimented with many ways of rendering them. And you don't just need to do blue, you don't need to do a simple gradient. You can have lots of fun with exploring different ways of doing it. And applying different effects in Illustrator can really get different ways of doing them. And so one of the most striking skies I think I found out there, and by one of the most famous American architects, is Lloyd Wright. And a lot of his renderings, which are in colored pencil, are streaks where there's sort of lines of blue, and the higher up they are, the closer the lines are. And as he sort of gets down to the lighter area, he uses less lines. And it's a sort of an interesting way. And I have a quick way of sort of beginning to implement that, which is sort of fun. It shows a few new techniques, and like I said, primarily it shows how to use clipping masks. And clipping mask is a way to hide a part of your drawing, which is not always needed because there's lots of other ways to do it, but sometimes, like in this way, there's just no other way of doing what I want to do than to use a clipping mask. So here we go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to unlock my sky. Here, actually, what I'm going to do is I might just make a new sky and just cover right over top of it. In fact, I'm going to turn off clouds too, because I don't think clouds will look right, because it sort of has clouds built into the process, quite honestly. And two, I don't want to cover up what we're doing. So I'm just going to start a new layer. I'm going to call it Sky 2. Obviously, you don't need to have two versions of Sky in your work. I'm just showing you alternatives, giving you inspiration, so you can take this drawing any way that you want. And I'm just going to come in and I'm going to draw a solid color. You know, Frank Lloyd Wright, if I sort of base it off of it, he tends to use this sort of almost dark blue, purpley color. I don't know with the colors I'm using it'll quite look right, because he has a whole color palette that he uses too. But I'll start there anyway as an example. I'm just going to drop this right on and put it on nice evening sky, which, by the way, I've seen lots of people have successful working with evening or sunsets or even nighttime skies. You'd have to change the windows appropriately. So again, there's lots of ideas that I can't cover everything. But here we go. So I'm going to drop that thing down here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to transparency. And you'll notice we have something over here that says make mask. And I'm going to make a mask. You'll notice that blue square disappears. And what does appear over here is this black rectangle. Basically, in a clipping mask, it's like adding a sublayer to this. And anything that's on this sublayer, if it's black, it's 100% transparent. If it's white, it's perfectly visible. And if it's a shade of gray or tone in between, it's the resulting transparency percentage of that. If I want to start by unclipping, you can see that just changes this thing to white, and everything comes back. But if I just as an experiment to add things to this thing, I have to click over here. Notice that little orange square. That means I'm now working in the mask layer. So if I come, this isn't really part of the process, it's just demonstration purposes, but if I come and set my color to black and I draw a square, it will make that square invisible, as I said. And if I make it any sort of shade of gray, it'll be oops, I misclicked there. Make it any sort of gray, it'll be somewhat in between transparency, right? So it's sort of like a way to very specifically control transparency in terms of geometry. All right. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take a rectangle and I'm going to make it the entire shape of my sky. All right. So I'm going to pull it here to here to here, and it's all white right now, so I don't see anything. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it into a gradient, because skies have gradients. And I want to set my one color. I'm not sure which color I want here, but I want it to be a dark gray, but probably not black. And I want to set my other color to be a light gray, but probably not white. So let me try. I'll just try this one here. Right. So we can now see I've sort of have a subtle change of the darker blue to the original sort of watercolory sky that I had below it. And that's because of the gradient going on here. And that's all well and good. But what I'm going to do now is, just like, since this is an object, I can also apply effects to it. So I'm going to come up here to effect. I'm going to go to texture. I'm going to apply grain. Here we go. What I had done already by default, yours is probably going to look like this, which is regular grain, which is these dots. What I'm going to do is click down here, and I'm going to change it to horizontal. And this is how I'm going to get my lines. So again, what I said before is if it's black, it's going to make it transparent. And if it's white, it's going to make it not transparent. So what I really want to do is I want to have these lines. I'm going to have black lines across here, or white lines as the inverse. And that's going to translate into whether I see the dark blue or not behind it. So I can change this as I want to. You can, do various things like that. I think mid contrast is probably about right. So I'll go with this and I'll say OK. We'll let this run, and we see we've got lines. Now what I should have done is I should have turned off the sky in the background, although it does add an interesting effect. But the reality is I want the darker color on the top, so I'm going to have to flip my gradient here, which I could do with this tool over here, or I could just do a flip of it right with this button, and now I've got the darker lines up top and fewer lines sort of fading on the bottom, and it sort of starts to approach that Frank Lloyd Wright look. Now I'm gonna just do a few things here. I'm gonna come back to my transparency. Right now, this is what confuses students when they work in this transparency. To get back to anything, like we can see we have no layer, like, oh, my layers are gone, what happened? No, your layers are still there. It's just that I'm in clipping mask mode, and I could add layers, just like I can add layers in non-clipping mask mode. I just didn't. So to get back to my regular drawing, I have to click over here. Notice the subtle orange box that happened here. That means I'm in regular mode, and I can come back to my layers over here, and I can turn off my sky below it now, so it goes more to white. Actually, Frank Lloyd Wright often used like on color trace and stuff, so even it wasn't a pure white, so you could go and play with the background color, if you will. For me, this color is way too dark in things, so I'm going to come here and certainly at least lighten it. One approach could be to play with the transparency as well, or I could just change the color to something that might work a little bit better with the color palette I have. And I could go to my color palettes here and see what might work, my color guide, if you will. And I could always play with transparency a little bit too if I wanted. I'll make this a little bit lighter yet still. Something like that. And so now I've got a very stylized sky. Now this stylized sky doesn't necessarily work with the stylization that I have down here. I'd probably want to look to potentially changing this, and I might go to look at something like Frank Lloyd Wright and see what he does for various things to see how he gets it. But I think what I like about it is really sort of stepping outside the bounds of what a sky looks like. It still implies sky, it makes it unique, and it uses Illustrator tools pretty efficiently. Much more efficient than, say, the watercolor method I previously showed. So it can do anything. But again, I really encourage you to explore things on your own, again, to really look at examples and precedents and see what you can do, and call me over and have a good time making this drawing your own. So with that, I will say good luck, and I look forward to working with you on making a great drawing.